Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. We're going to have a really interesting discussion, and I'm thrilled to have with us today David Minarsch, who is the co-founder and CEO at Valory. Valory is a really fascinating labs company that's working on autonomous systems that connect to blockchain networks. And previously, David was involved with Fetchai and has advanced degrees from Cambridge around economics. And so we're going to go deep into the intersection of artificial intelligence and crypto networks. And with that, David, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Lex. Pleasure to be here.
Let's brush up our audience on your background and your early career. How did you get into technology, into math, into machine learning, into economics? Like, what were some of the core experiences you had in those areas?
Maths was sort of the starting point. That's what I did after high school, effectively, for bachelor's. The reason there was that it seemed the best tool to not lock in too much of your future. I always loved maths, and it seemed like by picking maths, I wouldn't sort of have to do like this early choice, which I think often when you're quite young can be quite daunting. And I thoroughly enjoyed maths at uni. Met probably some of the best people, of my life there. And when I was doing maths, I had an opportunity to choose a minor. I did at University College London. I picked economics. That I picked because I always was interested sort of in, I guess, like society at large, how aggregate human behavior affects each other, big questions of politics and economics. And so that seemed like a relevant subject to have alongside maths. The nice thing then was that at UCL, they're quite strong in a few fields of economics. And at the time, there were a couple of strong game theory professors there as well. So in my third year, I came across a lot of game theory, and that sort of stuck with me. So when I then did my master's and later the PhD, it more and more kind of moved towards game theory. And so game theory is basically a subfield of economics, but also a subfield of applied maths. And what you do there is you have these sort of simplified models of certain aspects of an economy or human behavior, or generally some sort of interactions. And you define a set of players and actions, and then you kind of try to identify what the so-called Equilibria and what are so basically the outcomes of these interactions and what the sort of metrics around those are, and if you kind of perturb them a bit and things like that. So yeah, happy to dive into more there. That's sort of how I got into that.
You went to Cambridge for a PhD in economics, and is that around game theory topics? What kind of research did you do, and what kind of environment did you find there?
I basically did a PhD in sort of games on networks. So you basically take concepts from maths, which are these sort of graph theory, where you basically have nodes and edges in the most basic sense, and you can then sort of define, for instance, interactions. You can also define sort of, a network of states. The map of the globe is a network. If you can represent it as a network. Relationships can be represented like this. And so it's quite interesting to take graph theory and then think what happens if you play effectively, quote unquote, games on them in the game theory sense. So your actor's action space is sort of influenced by the graph topology, and then that can sort of allow you to make statements around, okay, a certain equilibrium arises maybe under certain graph structures than not others. I was quite fascinated by this because it sort of combined a lot of the sort of applied maths I had been interested in, and still allowed me to look at sort of rather interesting questions. And obviously always shaped by your kind of environment. So when I went for a master's in Cambridge, that was just at a height of a time where the professor I did my PhD with, Professor Goyal, had sort of attracted quite a lot of leading experts in game theory on graphs and or games on networks. And it was a fantastic time to be there and do the PhD. But I mean, every PhD is also, a test. And so I also was quite happy when it was over.
This might be a strange question, but you had talked about maps and graphs and essentially abstractions that are able to quantitatively represent large qualitative complex systems. And you'd also talked about equilibria, so the places where kind of things settle or behaviors settle or interactions and markets settle. And in your education, you went through quantitative methods, rigorous quantitative methods to solve for these things. But then lots of people also just have intuitions about how the world should be. Like we all read the news or Twitter and we get like these impressions of the complex system and form opinions about where the equilibria are. I'm curious, again, having gone through that formal training, like how different, or is it different, the intuition and feeling and kind of like gut guesses about how complex systems resolve and what the equilibria are, like people just guessing how things happen. And you see this in early stage investing or in the crypto markets where people will just make predictions based on kind of their feeling and their gut emotion. How different are people's intuitions about complex systems from, when you actually get in there and model them and simulate them and try to solve them in a rigorous manner? Can you talk about your observations about maybe like your initial intuitions and if they've been affected in any way or any takeaways you have after going through the training that you have?
So I would say relying purely on intuitions is super, super dangerous. And if you go through that kind of program yourself, you will have many occasions where your intuition will be proven wrong, often to the kind of polar opposite. So let's take a step back though. So like some people with a sort of bird's eye view of what economists do think that they sort of, are this hard science where you have this kind of model and then you just gotta figure out the data, you plug it into the model and boom, out comes the correct answer and everything's solved. That simply does not exist. So, economics is not physics. And so what you often different economists have different views on that, but like the kind of economists I felt most aligned with were those where models are sort of tools to, and those are mostly theorists, to be honest. Models are tools to basically understand small aspects of the world, some economics, some aspects of an economy or some aspects of smaller micro interactions between a group of businesses or a group of humans. And these models are helpful in understanding certain comparative statistics, as they would be called, or certain sort of, equilibrium conditions, but they never the full answer. So it's not like no economic theorist will ever be able to give you a model which can explain it all. And if they claim to do so, you should be very, very cautious in accepting that and probing them heavily. So basically, often the process, during my PhD, would almost be you come up with certain hypotheses, and then you try to maybe, develop small mathematical proofs or examples. Usually you start with examples, on a piece of paper where you say, okay, well, I'm having this kind of conception about how this would look at scale, but let's look at maybe how this looks with two people or two businesses or whatever, your entities are you're trying to model. And then you say, okay, well, now I figured out with 2, you go to 3. And often what happens actually as you go from 2 to 3, everything changes, like even sometimes 180. And so the simple equilibrium notion you might have had sort of already starts breaking down or represents itself differently. And so these examples can be helpful. And yeah, I would say intuition, it's a forth and back between intuition and then sort of trying to formalize that. You can't do away with one or the other. If you didn't have intuition, then, where would you even start? Where would you be looking? But if you purely rely on it to explain everything around you, then I think you'll have a very naive view of the world.
I think one of the really interesting things about the current moment is that you can actually start modeling out economic systems through the launch of crypto networks in a way that really wasn't possible for people studying economics or game theory, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now you can have experiments that people participate in. You can have mechanisms that you design that, people pick up on or don't pick up on. And you can actually have like a lived experience, not just either a blind guess, a hypothesis or a hypothetical simulation or model of the world. You can actually build out a toy macroeconomy and let people flow through it and break it and so on.
I agree. Yeah. And actually that's like the ability to create entire economies is one thing which like really pulled me towards crypto. Totally agree.
It's a pretty profound change for the economic profession to actually have the ability to use some version of the scientific method and not just, create instabilities in various South American countries and see what happens.
Yeah, randomized control trials.
Exactly. So you finish Cambridge, you have this background. What are the things you do next, and what are the types of experiences that resonate with you?
Yeah, so I mostly did my PhD as an exercise in knowledge seeking. So I don't think I'm a particularly great academic. In fact, I know I'm not. I just found it super interesting to have the time which a PhD gives you to kind of expand on that subject. But at some point, I was also frustrated by that exact fact because I could see how, especially as you're nearing the publishing process, there's issues there. It just moves way too slow and it's totally ridiculous. There's nothing nice to be said about the publishing mechanism. Everyone who tries to say something nice, I think, kids themselves, given their circumstances. But specifically in economics, that is. The other thing is that, like doing a PhD right after master and bachelor has some benefits in the sense that you can continue that knowledge seeking in an intense way and you sort of everything's still present from your previous study and that helps. But the real downside is that you're just not exposed to the real world, quote unquote. Like a lot of kind of questions you ask are kind of guided by your experience in the very narrow bubble of academia. And there's all these, really relevant questions in industry which you are just totally oblivious to. And even if you get exposed to them by sort of people who are exposed, like coming maybe to university or you're doing an internship or something, it often like sort of very superficial. So towards the end of the PhD, I really felt like this has to change. I wanted to just do something practical. And actually, since my bachelor's, I had been sort of playing around with various sort of web applications and more statistical models and stuff, which could be seen as sort of backends to applications. And I was playing around with them. And I thought, okay, let me go into some fintechs, play around a bit with some more data, more on the data science side, machine learning side. And that's what I did for some time. So there was a mixture of short distance working in those kind of fintechs on helping them build classifiers or other kind of ML pipelines. And then also I had various stints in actually early entrepreneurship. And that was initially quite focused on also using sort of my niche statistical interests and leveraging them, in that case, in politics. So my first startup there was basically two of us, my co-founder and I. We went to MPs in London, so members of parliament, and offered them this software suite which allowed them to take publicly available data from census and publicly available data from recent opinion polls, and then merge that with information they had about the constituency, like recent polls they had done on a constituency level, and then use these cool like multi-level statistical models to kind of make some inference about like constituency level opinion. That actually was quite a cool product, and members of parliament, we offered it, we really liked it. But when we joined this accelerator Entrepreneur First, they ultimately convinced us that the market is just not big enough for VC. And so that was my sort of first real exposure to VC thinking. And ultimately, I accepted that and moved on.
There's an interesting takeaway there as well, that you were engaging with governance, traditional governance in the UK, and trying to pull together some sort of big data set that then could be packaged or explained to people in positions of power. Like, how was the math transforming, I guess, the data into something that was being used?
Yeah, I mean, the problem was really simple to explain. Like, there's these members of parliaments, and they'll have these constituency level surveys, which would be they wouldn't be representative of the constituency necessarily just by their design, because that would be too expensive. And then they would have a lot of covariates, like, for instance, like, is this, what's the gender? Where in the constituency are they? What's the socioeconomic background, which you then can figure out, like, at least on a statistical level from the census data. So actually using sort of these statistical tools, you could then sort of build a model which would allow to make some predictions what this kind of non-representative poll would translate to for the constituency. And that's very valuable for the MPs, because they obviously at the end of the day should be representing their constituency. So if they have a good understanding of constituency level, like, opinion, then that very clearly helps those who are intended to represent their constituents. Basically here it was like a cost thing, right? Like, in theory that was available if you wanted to pay like some YouGov or some other big entity to do that sort of for you, but practically they only very rarely would do that. Like, maybe once an election cycle, if like some very important opinion poll would have to be done.
Okay, cool. So that's your experience in that power relationship between, well, there's an interesting sort of analogy there too, right? Because the MP is kind of like the equilibrium position of the underlying constituents as well. And then the MPs compete with each other also to clear at various policies that are then implemented.
Also, just like one last point, I mean, in hindsight, I'm actually quite happy that the VC thinking kind of steered me away from it. I don't necessarily think it was the right reason to abandon this, but I do think politics is quite fundamentally broken in a lot of ways. And I probably had a somewhat rose-tinted view of the world still, sort of at that point, where I don't know how much impact that tooling would have had down the line. And so, like, focusing on impact is, I think, important.
So let's transition to Fetch.ai and the work that you did there. I think it's so interesting to go from this like very human, old school version of aggregating information and then representing it into policy towards, blockchain networks and AI agents. So take us to Fetch.ai and, what is that project about and what did you do there?
Yeah, so between what we were just discussing at somewhat length and Fetchai, and me joining Fetchai, I actually built what one could consider a more proper startup, which ultimately failed as well. But that was very focused on a similar concept, like similar statistical tools, but applying it to teams and organizations. So you can see sort of how the kind of focus shrinks. You're trying to help teams understand things about each other, where they might have pain points and so on. So we built this kind of effectively HR software or team software, which allowed them to do that. Why was that interesting? Because it actually is like, even though it was a failure in the sense that it never exited and we closed it down, it taught me a lot about how like things can go wrong in a startup and why, and like about the early hiring, the early decisions you're making, the early investment decisions, these whole processes, and I've still drawn them today. So going to Fetch, that happened basically after an intense period of like despair. Basically, once that venture failed, I was quite upset naturally, and really felt, okay, this is like a point where I should think a bit hard about what's next. Often I felt these kind of transition happened quite abrupt. I just sort of opportunistically, took the next step, and with joining Fetch, that came after a long process of sort of introspection and thinking, okay, what do I actually want to do in the next 10, 15, 20 years? And it became very clear to me after doing sort of this analysis that I wanted to build something meaningful at the intersection of like the skills I had acquired over many years in game theory and economics, my practical sort of work I had been doing since, which was sort of around data science, machine learning, and an area which had increasingly become drawn towards, which was crypto. Like there were, periods in which I got drawn to this more and periods in which less, but certainly towards 2018 onwards, I was sort of very focused on that on the side. And Fetch was actually one of the few projects at that intersection. And they were also UK based, and I met the team, enjoyed working with them. And so initially when I joined them, they had, I think, just gone through the ICO or were about to. And they had this white paper which outlined this vision of multi-agent systems sitting on top of blockchains, and with quite a few kind of example areas of use cases where this would be useful, often quite industry focused, like supply chains and financial use cases and so on. Can go into them more. But what particularly interested me was to say, okay, well, I'm not sure whether all these things, in this white paper make sense, but what definitely makes sense to me is that there will be sort of software agents using blockchains. And that made sense to me because any other means of payments for multi-agent systems just didn't seem sensible. If you think of like a software agent having to register for a bank account, or a software agent having to go through any lengthy onboarding process with various sort of payments providers, that seemed like not scalable and clearly not conceptually like the right way forward. And then, at the same time, you have all these smart contract chains emerging, and it was kind of obvious that, software agents like humans could use them to not just do payments. They could do all sorts of things and contract on them in various complex ways, be it, in finance, DeFi related sense or outside. So I was really compelled by that part of the white paper, I guess, to focus on autonomous agents. And then over 2 years also, I built up sort of their team there to create initially an autonomous agent framework, and then sort of build use cases with that.
What is an autonomous agent framework?
That's a great question.
I love when things are so complicated that just asking the definition of the words is a question that we have to pause on.
Yeah. At the basic, an agent is a software program which takes in some information from its environment, so it perceives information. It then has some sort of internals, like that. There could be some sort of memory, there could be some state, there could be various sort of internal decision-making logic. And then eventually it might actually act upon its environment again. And that action could be driven purely by internals or by some of these observations it's making. So this is like this perceive internals act loop is sort of intrinsic. Then when you add the multi, we're talking about multiple software agents interacting with each other in some sort of domain. So this could be sort of inside a factory where agents are representing machines or tools or whatever, and they could be sort of across entity dimensions where one agent can trade with another. And so the autonomous element really comes in. Well, one more thing around the multi thing is that multi-agent systems usually have this property that something happens on an emergence level as an application, which on the individual agent level doesn't exist. So an example, which we might talk later in the context of OLAS, is like you could have multiple agents interacting, create prediction markets. So the emerging outcome is sort of prediction markets, which track certain events, but any given agent just sort of fulfills some small part in this emerging outcome or behavior. The final point is around sort of autonomous, and this is basically this idea that the software agent is somehow owned by some other entity. Could be another software agent or often a human or organization, and it sort of autonomously, at least for periods of time, acts on behalf of that entity.
I guess what's the current state of Fetch and the work that you had built for them? What's the scale of the systems they've deployed? Like, is it getting traction or not? And maybe transition also into what you're focused on now and how you got there.
When I was working there, I built this agent framework called AEA, Autonomous Economic Agent. And this was really focused on sort of building single agents, which then live off-chain as kind of software agent and have a wallet. They can take all these on-chain actions. They can send message to each other off-chain, transact on and off-chain, and so on. But what I noticed is that what's really interesting is kind of thinking more about this multi-aspect. And I also really wanted to, be entrepreneurial again. I don't know. I'm probably not the person to work long time in some sort of under some leadership. I am quite entrepreneurial, and I felt like I had built this agent framework and it was time to move on. And that happened in 2021. And so after I transitioned out very sort of slowly, reduced my hours and made sure the agent framework continued running with this team there. And as I was kind of refocusing, I found my two co-founders and refounded Valory in the summer of 2021. And Valory, the key insight there is that you take agents and create effectively a service which sits on top of it, like this kind of emergent service, which is made up of these agents. That's on the technical side. And what this allows is basically that, be it individuals, be it a DAO, be it organizations, maybe one day we hope big organizations, even like regional governments or so on, can basically co-own an entire autonomous agent. So rather than me as an individual saying, okay, I have this autonomous agent here, which acts on my behalf, there's a group of entities who say, okay, here's this autonomous service, which is made up of many small agents. And this autonomous service is acting on our behalf. That kind of technical construct, we call it the autonomous service, allows effectively co-ownership of an autonomous agent. And now we're going to take one more technical leap, which is that as you think about sort of orthogonally what happens over in the AI field more broadly, you have like recently these large language models. Now, increasingly what people get excited about with large language models is that they effectively allow you to build more interesting agents. And this is where we also can see that as AI moves closer to what we call general intelligence, it is most likely going to have very agentic behavior, right? It's not guaranteed, but there's a lot of optimization pressures towards this, because effectively those who have powerful AI systems who make them also agentic will be able to probably reap higher rewards than those who have a human in the loop. And so ultimately then, and still bear with me hopefully, what we really should care about on a societal level is that we are able to co-own agentic AIs. And so coming back to Valory's mission is basically all about allowing you to co-own autonomous services, which are co-ownable agentic AIs in the end state, right?
So let me ask you a naive question. And this goes to, why is it important to quote unquote own these agents. And then also, I think, just to build out the intuition of what an agent is. So let's say I have a Google email, I have a Gmail, and I use that Gmail to log into Zapier. And Zapier is a Web2 company, right? I create an account at Zapier. I pay them some amount. I pay them, let's say, $100 a month. And on my behalf, Zapier can do a bunch of automation tasks. They can scan my email for certain keywords. And if those keywords are met, then they can create a database of important stuff for me. Or on certain dates, they can publish tweets, or they can take any Web2 software, find triggers within those softwares, and then do the plumbing and automatically sort of do stuff on my behalf. Now, is that number one? Is every one of the Zapier recipes, is that essentially an agent? And then number two, don't I already, quote unquote, own the agent because I control the keys to it by, logging into the platform? Can you take down my counterfactual?
So yes, great points. So firstly, the definition of agent or AI agent and even autonomous agent, they are like super broad, and there's a spectrum from use cases you described, which are very close to sort of what most people would refer to as automation, all the way over to like fully independent, autonomous, agentic super AI, and what I actually think that it's like, on the Ola stack, or, Valory, we haven't quite covered yet what even Olas is, but on this autonomous server stack, which I mentioned before, you could, and we have built sort of use cases which are much more automation focused than they are necessarily involving sort of this dynamic decision making, which kind of moves us towards more autonomous agentic AI behavior. And an analogy here, which might be making this a bit more concrete, is sort of your car, right? So like we're going from like manual to automatic to now self-driving, and there's all these levels of self-driving. Similar levels should be defined by agents, I would say. Now to ownership, there's many levels of ownership when it comes to autonomous agents. We can start with like things like the wallet, right? So it might be that this workflow you were describing on your Web2 platform controls some sort of wallet to move funds around under these conditions when they're triggered. Now you could imagine that there's some sort of architecture where you are ultimately the owner of that wallet, maybe with some sort of smart account abstraction, so multi-signature, where this automation workflow can really be constrained in its action. But there is also the other end of the spectrum where effectively you own nothing but just a Google login, and you don't even own that if they revoke your access. So ownership, again, here is broad. Then we come to the software itself, right? So is this, maybe you own the wallet and it's a great smart account setup where you are actually like always in control of the funds and nothing can go wrong there and it's all perfect. But actually you have like a total black box in front of you and you're totally locked in from an economic perspective, right? So if tomorrow you want to move away from them because they double the fees or do something else you don't like, then it's not possible. And then the software ownership sort of has like multiple dimensions. Like there's, do I have the code? Do I control the running code? This is actually two different things, right? I might have access to the, Twitter supposedly opened their code, now X. But then we don't know, is this the running code? And even if it is, like it's kind of two different pairs of things. So ownership has all these flavors. The interesting thing in an autonomous service is that you can really own it all. So you can own the code in the sense that it's open source code. And, permission is with licenses which adhere to that open source spirit. You can own the instance that is running or co-own it by basically having the application be composed of multiple agents where different parties operate them, much like in a blockchain. So I'm sure, I'm talking quite abstract now. It might be helpful to go into some concrete use cases where I can kind of exemplify that.
Let's transition to Valory and the launch of the Autonolas Protocol. And you've gone from theory to implementation. The protocol is pretty fresh. It's been launched in 2023. It's gotten a ton of attention. I think at one point it was over half of all the transactions of Gnosis chain. I don't know if now it's like 95% of the transaction of Gnosis chain. You'll have to update me. As well as, building out a DAO for the protocol and having a vibrant token community. So can you talk about what that protocol is, what the applications are, and kind of what are you using Gnosis chain for?
The protocol itself, like Autonolas, is historically called Autonolas. Both names are fine and will be forever fine. It's just that we found a lot of people struggle with Autonolas. So Autonolas has a on-chain component, which is the protocol, and a off-chain component, which is the stack, which, if you want an analogy, you can think of it like OP stack, what that is for rollups. The Autonolas stack is for these autonomous services. Now, the protocol itself is actually even a year older than you were saying. So we launched it progressively from 2022 onwards. And then the Autonolas token is live and publicly since the summer. The Autonolas protocol effectively coordinates like an ocean of services. Now, what we mean by this is that we, as the Autonolas DAO members, want to enable more and more autonomous services which are owned directly by the protocol. And so these are these off-chain systems, but they can be on-chain owned by the DAO itself, by its smart contracts. And we want to enable anyone who wants to build on the Autonolas stack to effectively also own or co-own their use cases, be it as a DAO or as an individual or as a group of businesses. And the protocol facilitates all that today. Now, one use case might be, in order now to kind of make things a bit concrete and tie it all a bit together. Earlier this year, large language model came to surface last year for the public eye, obviously not for AI practitioners. And earlier this year, we created what we call a governator. It was initially a joke project as part of ETH Denver. But basically what it is an autonomous agent, in this case, an autonomous service, that acts as a delegatee. So you can delegate the system your tokens, and then it will vote proposals. And here we can sort of exemplify the entire Autonolas stack and Autonolas protocol and kind of what roles it has. So the different agents which make up the autonomous service are all coded in this software framework, and they are then run off-chain. And you can think of them like a bit like a mini blockchain. Like they're communicating, all these autonomous agents are communicating constantly with each other. And effectively, none of the individual agents has control over the system. Much like your kind of sovereign Cosmos blockchain, the entire autonomous service needs to be in agreement in order to do anything on-chain. And here, what the service does on-chain is basically vote on proposals. What it does off-chain is kind of arrive at an understanding of what these proposals are about and how it should be voting based on the delegated voting preferences. And the role of the Autonolas protocol in this context is to basically provide all the primitives to coordinate these off-chain nodes, where you have like operators who are running them, who have to put up like security deposits. You have like the actual service owner, which in this case can be a DAO, and so on. So this is sort of the operational aspect of the protocol. There's also the tokenomics, but maybe we'll pause here and then.
In the governance example, so you've got a bunch of agents that are going to vote on some proposal. What does that mean, right? So you've got, for any DAO and for the governance of any DAO, you've got proposals that want to change some underlying parameter, or they want to add some product or some feature, or, so you need to know everything about the policy space of the DAO, and you need to also understand what the proposal says. And it's funny, of course, how this echoes the MP startup that you had with the surveys of constituents. But, here again, you have like this underlying data set about the stuff that's going on and the proposal. How does an agent take a view on any of this stuff? Like, what does it ingest? What does it output? And how do you create variety in terms of what the different agents infer from the underlying data?
So here, the product is quite early. You can think of it like you've delegated to a person who's quite superficial in the way in which it reads proposals. So it will read the proposals and it will do a little bit of research, but it won't go and figure out every detail in the docs. And it certainly won't have any sort of prior knowledge about the DAO necessarily. So that's a perfectly fine delegatee for, some time, and then you'll want to improve it. So what I'm saying is basically it's a beta system. The concrete way it does it is it doesn't currently, as I indicated, use any sort of DAO specific knowledge base. But this is actually a nice example why we allude to this ocean of services. So a lot of people come and ask us, it's like, well, why would there be multiple services sort of interacting off-chain? And the reason is always specialization. The same thing with humans. We think that autonomous agents and autonomous services will very much specialize on certain roles. And the prediction market use case you alluded to is also an example of this. So here, it becomes very infeasible very quickly for this governator agent to become an expert on every single DAO. And that's also, if you think about how humans would go about this, is not how we would go about it. Like if you delegate to some person, they're not necessarily an expert about every DAO. They might just have access to experts about those DAOs before they vote. And some of them are, in fact, experts. So that's one part of the answer. The other, I want to come back to this sort of specialization piece. The other part of the answer is that if you think about why the service architecture here, so it's specifically not to introduce diversity between these agents, it's to almost like ensure that this off-chain system actually comes to consensus. So what would be dangerous is if you sort of delegate to a single autonomous agent, because now you are basically trusting 100% the operator of this agent to do the right thing, quote unquote. I mean, they could be showing you some open source code and be like, this is what I'm running. But I mean, you have no clue. They could be running some other code. They could be running no code. All sorts of things could be happening. And this is one of the benefits of an autonomous service. Let's say there's 4 agents. That's already, it's not a large number, but you already understand the property there. With 4 agents, you need at least 3 of them being in agreement at any given time for the service to take any action whatsoever. So it's a similar threshold you would have if you think about the sort of sovereign Cosmos blockchain, where if that had only 4 nodes, then you'd need at least 3 of them to agree in order for any state transitions to happen. And that's the same thing here. And the benefit then is that you can actually use those sort of non-deterministic large language models to even like sort of consider using them in this governance process, right? Because it might be that one of the agents using sort of an AI model, which is not deterministic, gets some answer which is different from the other agent, even if it honestly follows the implementation of the code. So I hope that kind of sheds some light on your questions.
Let's open up the prediction market example as well. You've mentioned before that, you targeted Gnosis chain because it has embedded in it a bunch of smart contracts that can create prediction markets for long tail events. And there's pretty shallow activity on them, meaning not a lot of people are taking positions. What is it that Autonolas does around that?
Yeah, so I also realized I didn't answer your previous question to Gnosis. So on Gnosis, actually, let me answer that quickly. We didn't do half the transaction of Gnosis of all the chain, but more than half, and I think currently it's around 75% of all safe transactions on Gnosis. So that's because the safe protocol is sort of embedded inside our protocol, and we are somewhat like by far the major consumer of it on Gnosis chain, and very likely will be on any chain where we deploy the protocol in the future.
Just to confirm that, is that because that's where you park the robots in the safe? That's the ownership?
Yeah. So you can think of like the off-chain system, the autonomous service has one on-chain representation, which is the safe, the multisig. It can be any other multisig architecture, which has like similar properties, but this is a very proven one, which we like a lot. And every single agent instance is you can think of it like a sign-on, let's say. And so then, off-chain, you have this kind of consensus they adhere to, and then on-chain, there's also these kind of thresholds, which the safe guarantees upon the signatures. And then you can also have further on-chain guarantees if you want to, which limit the action space of the off-chain system. So that's why there's this kind of perfect match between those two technologies. So coming back to the prediction market use case, one, you alluded to the protocols which are deployed on Gnosis, which made this relatively straightforward lift to bring these AI agents there to participate in the system. Another benefit of Gnosis chain is that it has relatively low gas fees, which particularly in the early days of the Autonolas Protocol is important because obviously the technology wants to grow, wants to evolve, and the more transactions you can do, the faster you can find edge cases in the stack, in the agent behaviors, etc. So on Gnosis alone, I think this year we've done over 150,000 transactions. We must be close to 200 now. There's an ecosystem dashboard as well, which we can circulate for listeners to get the exact numbers. But okay, so coming back to the use case, there are effectively 3 agents involved. One agent is the market creator, which, as the name suggests, creates the markets. One agent is the trader, which basically takes position in prediction markets. And one agent type, I should say type, because listing types, one agent type is the mech. We'll get to the mech in a second. It's effectively providing AI models. Now, what's interesting here is that the market creator effectively provides liquidity for markets which need to be which haven't closed yet, where the agents can participate in the prediction markets, which kind of track a certain event at this time, usually binary events. And what then happens is that the trader agents can basically place trades to take effectively positions on either side of this event. And they do that by interacting with other agents, these mech type agents, which give them access to various different types of tools. And tools are sometimes as simple as an AI model directly. So a tool might literally just wrap a specific large language model, let's say, could be any model, but that's quite common. Or a tool might be as complex as almost like one of those more sort of automation-like use cases you described before. So it does like a web request, then it maybe creates like an embedding, and then maybe it uses an LLM, and then it does maybe another web request, and then another LLM, and then eventually a response. So what's interesting here is that these agents specialize in different parts of this single product, quote unquote, like the prediction market, and they take on different roles there. And that also allows the operators to specialize. So what we now have in OLAS is that there's this kind of staking expeditions. It's a program to safely roll staking into the Autonolas protocol. And lots of people are now running these trader agents with their own funds and stake some Autonolas. And then these trader agents interact with sort of other agents, which are these mechs, and an economy emerges. What I find very exciting about this is that it allows like a community like the Autonolas DAO to effectively bootstrap like a whole fleet of agents, which all specialize in different things, which then can become input for other systems. So these mech type agents, even though they're heavily used by the trader agents, they're actually now also used by this governator, which we discussed before, and a couple of other applications in the Autonolas ecosystem. And so what starts emerging is this sort of infra flywheel between different types of services in the Autonolas ecosystem.
Thank you for going deeper and into all that color. We're coming up on time, and I can't help but imagine, like this machine economy of robots trading with each other on smart contracts and paying each other in tokens. And, I think something like 70% of the internet websites out there are bot created. I think if you look at Twitter, there's a massive sort of artificial account issue that they've had for a long time. If you look at financial markets and you look at high frequency trading, I mean, it's like 95% of the orders that are being thrown out there are by various machine systems meant to misdirect other machine systems that are trying to snipe away different trades. If you look at protocol like blockchain transactions, you've got MEV bots like going and reading through everyone's transactions to figure out what they can arbitrage. Are we moving, and this just being kind of the last question and framing, are we moving into a world where you're seeing, economic activity and AI agents like reflecting the kind of sort of software robot world that we already have in all these other places? Is that what's going to happen, or is there some other version of the future that you see ahead?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at the micro and the macro. I think, like in true economists speak, I think at the macro, what dominates for me is that we have this enormous optimization pressure to very powerful agentic AI, which moves towards AGI. And like my major concern here is not that one of the doomers that we will all be sort of fried by these agents or whatever. My major concern is that effectively we go back to some sort of feudal societies where it's like one or two giga companies who have it all and the rest sort of depends upon them or maybe doesn't even exist much. And that is because the economic gains from being able to outsource work to an autonomous software system is pretty obvious. Now, how fast we get there and so on, there's all these questions. That means that we need to not just figure out how we build aligned AI. It doesn't help us much if that is aligned to some Altman only. We need to figure out how we have these sort of agentic AI systems being widely spread, open source, but also co-ownable, because often it's not just a matter of access to software, it's also access to software which has access to resources to get stuff done, right? Like if you think about investing, well, yeah, I mean, if I don't even have access to some of the opportunities, then it really doesn't matter if I have access to the software. I need starting capital and so on and so forth. So this is on the macro level. On the micro level, if you look like at crypto specifically, I think like there's this huge opportunity from really doing a kind of total perspective shift for like what role crypto can play. I think like we naturally tend to be very tied to our like presence, where we often want these sort of interactions to be sort of a mobile app or some sort of nice UI where I then manage my portfolio or do some other thing crypto allows, like some social game which basically is just a money game. But the problem I see with this is that a lot of people don't even want to do that. I mean, I know a lot of people who don't want to manage their finances or who will not be very excited about having yet another social network, which is even more focused on sort of points earning or of some kind or another. And so I think there's this huge opportunity for people in crypto to embrace sort of autonomous agents, autonomous systems, and think about how can they offer a totally new UX to end users, where I can, get my granny her robo-advisor, which she actually owns as an autonomous agent, which actually takes care of her funds without her having to sit there in front of an interface and doing really anything. It just delivers that as an outcome. So I think it makes a lot of sense for protocols to seek their next billion users, not just with actual humans, but autonomous agents who, like in the example of the prediction markets, can often use these very hard to use crypto protocols better and can provide abstraction for users. Because ultimately, as a user, I mean, it boils down, like as a human, it boils down to very few things I care about. It's things like health, it's things like wealth, it's things like social contacts and so on. And the, mobile application is not necessarily the highest achievement to deliver them. An autonomous agent can be, because it can be the system which just goes away and creates outcomes for you. So yes, in conclusion, I think what we'll see actually is that these autonomous agents many of them will become like these great interfaces via which humans ultimately interact with crypto indirectly. And they will become like the primary daily active users of crypto.
What a fascinating and interesting future. And I'm really excited about the project and the protocol. And I think you're thinking so many steps ahead of where the rest of the world is, but you're actually making it a reality and deploying the software. So congratulations on the progress and the adoption in the community. If you want our listeners to learn more about you or about the project, where should they go?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is olas.network, so olas Spanish way.network. You can find the protocol, the DAO. I'm also on Twitter, David_ENIM.
Fantastic. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the Fintech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things fintech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.